Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon from Jakarta and welcome. Hope everybody is doing well and staying healthy. My name is Afni and I'll be the MC for today's forum. Ladies and gentlemen, Foreign Policy Community of Indonesia is pleased to collaborate with National Graduate Institute for Policy Studies, GRIPS, to convene our joint discussion series. In this exciting collaboration, FPCI and GRIPS will convene monthly public forum discussing most pressing international issues on foreign policy and the world affairs. Today, our forum will bring the theme of opportunities and challenges for a peaceful and stable Indo-Pacific region. Before we move forward, please allow me to welcome His Excellency Akira Chiba, Ambassador of Japan to ASEAN, His Excellency Jun Yamazaki, Ambassador of Japan to Singapore, and His Excellency Yutaka Imura, former Ambassador of Japan to Indonesia, and Senior Fellow of GRIPS Alliance, as I have been told that they are joining us here today. Welcome, Ambassadors. To start our forum, I would like to invite Dr. Dino Patijalal, FPCI Founder and Chairman, to deliver his welcoming remarks. Dr. Dino, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Afni, and hello, everybody. My name is Dino Patijalal. I'm the founder and chairman of Foreign Policy Community of Indonesia. I want to acknowledge Professor Akihiko Tanaka, president of GRIPS, as co-host of this event. And then also I want to acknowledge Ambassador Yutaka Imura, my very good friend, former ambassador of Japan to Indonesia, His Excellency Yun Yamazaki, Japan ambassador to Singapore, and then my good friend also, Akira Chiba, the Japanese ambassador to ASEAN. I'm very happy that FPCI and GRIPS have engaged in a collaboration to have regular virtual public forum. This is a platform whereby officials, policy experts, students, professionals, the general public can hear and listen to high quality discussions and debates on current issues of the world, especially those affecting the Indo-Pacific region. This forum will be held once a month until February 2022. And the next forum, it will discuss the Asian century. It will discuss how we can get to know generation Y and Z on their influence, drives, and worldviews. I think that's going to be a very interesting session. We're going to discuss also after that climate policy post COP26. What are the next moves? And last but not least, Asia's contribution to the world towards reducing poverty and inequality. So these are all topics which are of great importance to us in the region, and it will be discussed by leading minds in Indonesia and Japan. Right? And this is the session where today we'll discuss opportunities and challenges for a peaceful and stable Indo-Pacific region. And in today's discussion, we will dissect various aspects of this issue. We're going to talk about differing or varying visions on the Indo-Pacific and regional order. We're going to discuss the impact of US-China strategic competition and rivalry on the region, and how do the regional countries view them. We're going to discuss the undefined relations between Quad, AUKUS, and ASEAN, which is certainly a great topic of interest to all of us, and also the political implications of weakening multilateralism due to rising geopolitical tensions and COVID-19. And to discuss these things, we have really three of the brightest minds in the Indo-Pacific. We have Ambassador H.E.Bilahari Kausikan, certainly a great Singaporean diplomat. He's retired now. His last position is former permanent secretary for Singapore Foreign Ministry. And then we have Professor Gordon Flake, a really good friend of mine. And whenever I want to ask for the latest update, I just pick up the phone and call Gordon. He's always full of insights and analysis. And he knows everybody in Australia and in the United States. And last but not least, Professor Akihiko Tanaka. He did a lecture that we organized for Southeast Asia Lecture Hall. We all benefited from his wide and deep knowledge of the region and command on world issues. So it's really promising to be a very good discussion, and I look forward to listening to their analysis and insights. Yeah. So with that, and the moderator will be Dr. Sylvia Yazid from Universities of Parahyangan, one of my favorite private universities. They are very big on international relations. So thank you everybody for joining us, and let's have a good discussion. Thank you, Afni.
Thank you, Dr. Dino, for your remarks. Now I would like to invite Professor Akihiko Tanaka, President of GRIPS, to deliver his opening remarks. Professor, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Akihiko Tanaka. It is my really honor and great pleasure to co-host this virtual webinar together with FPCI. Particularly, as Dr. Joel mentioned, it is my great opportunity to join the discussion on today's subject, the opportunities and challenges for the Indo-Pacific or peaceful and stable Indo-Pacific. The subject matter is particularly important for Japan, the GRIPS, and myself. It is important for Japan mainly because it was the former Prime Minister of Japan, Abe Shinzo, who propagated the concept of the Indo-Pacific. After he made his speech in Nairobi, Kenya, on the occasion of TICAD, Conference for African Development, the Japanese Foreign Ministry used his vision of a free and open Indo-Pacific, and then urged other countries to be familiarized with this concept. And then many countries began to use this regional concept, including the ASEAN leaders. And the subject is important for GRIPS, National Graduate Institute for Policy Studies, too, because well, under the leadership of Ambassador Imura, we have organized a study group. What constitute the Indo-Pacific cooperation? What constitute Japan's policy for the Indo-Pacific? And we composed our recommendation to the Japanese government. Some of them, I think, have been utilized by the Japanese government. And so for GRIPS too, the concept of Indo-Pacific is very, very important. And it is important for me personally too. As a matter of introduction, I would like to say a few things about what I did before coming to GRIPS. I was a professor of international relations at the University of Tokyo, but from 2012 to 2015, I served as president of Japan International Cooperation Agency. And on that capacity, I traveled a lot in the Southeast Asia, South Asia, Africa, and then, well, sometime around until about 2013, I have come to believe that conventional regional divisions such as Southeast Asia, South Asia, Africa, inadequate, because many of JICA's work in Southeast Asia, South Asia, and Africa have had really interconnected nature. And so in my speeches and in some of the time, I used the concept of the Indo-Pacific before Prime Minister Abe used. And so, for example, when I went to Bangladesh in 2014, I delivered a lecture at the Dhaka University in which I said that Bay of Bengal and Bangladesh would become the hub of the greater Indo-Pacific region. And so for me too, it is really gratifying that many people are beginning to use the concept of Indo-Pacific. And so in this way, today's subject is really important for Japan, for GRIPS, and for me. And I think it is important for many of you and many of the Southeast Asian countries, as well as the ASEAN's dialogue partners. And finally, I would like to repeat what Dr. Jalal mentioned. It is a great opportunity for us to host a series of webinars on various issues very important to both Japan and Indonesia. And I'm very much looking forward to not just today's webinar, but the series of webinars that we are able to organize. With this, I would like to stop my initial remarks, and looking forward to joining the discussion, substantive discussion with Gordon Flake and H.E.Bilahari Kausikan. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Tanaka, for your remarks. Before we start the discussion, I would like to briefly introduce our moderator today, Dr. Sylvia Yazid. She is an associate professor in International Relations Department at Parahyangan Catholic University, Indonesia. Dr. Yazid has more than 15 years of experience as a lecturer as well as researcher. She has a demonstrated history of research and capacity building experience in migration, human rights, and democratization. Additionally, Dr. Yazid is familiar with civil society activism and policy analysis. Welcome, Dr. Yazid. How are you?
I'm good, thank you, Afni.
Now, without further ado, I would like to pass over the floor to Dr. Yazid to moderate the discussion. Dr. Yazid, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Afni. Good afternoon, everyone. The beauty of having Professor Tanaka and Dr. Jalal at the beginning is that they have taken most of my introduction. So I'll keep it short. Thank you very much, sirs. So welcome again to this event organized by FPCI and GRIPS. And today we are going to discuss about one of the major geopolitical developments and also the most politically and economically attractive part of the world in the 21st century. Yes, you can guess, Indo-Pacific. So why Indo-Pacific? Because this area is highly attractive due to a concept of combining the two most productive and strategic oceans, which is Indian and Pacific Oceans. And as explained by Professor Tanaka, it was first debuted in 2007 by the Japan Prime Minister Shinzo Abe. And since then, a number of arrangements have been proposed. Those inhabiting the region tend to promote inclusive cooperation while sustaining the centrality of the existing regional cooperation, such as ASEAN. On the other hand, Indo-Pacific is also being used by big power countries as a venue to compete politically, militarily, and economically. Then come the not so new players, even from across the ocean, bringing their points of view and approaches. Also proposals for strategic arrangements in the form of mini-lateral cooperation. And their presences, of course, make the region more dynamic, more parties, more interests, more interactions to manage. This requires leadership in responding and navigating the geopolitical dynamic in the region. Could it be by ASEAN? That's what we can discuss today. And in this time of pandemic, geopolitical tension, competition, and rivalry continue to happen. The US and China strategic rivalry and competition is at the center, and other pre-existing frictions and sparks are lingering on the background. However, despite all the commotions, Indo-Pacific is still potential for cooperation and collaboration, which are inclusive and mutual, hopefully. Well, they say when elephants are fighting, the grass suffer. The strong can do what they can, the weak suffer what they must. The question is it possible to minimize the suffering? Or even better, can we ask the elephants to stop quarreling? With that, I would like to introduce again our speakers for today. Professor Akihiko Tanaka, currently the president of the National Graduate Institute for Policy Studies, or GRIPS. He is the professor of international politics at the Institute for Advanced Studies on Asia. But what intrigued me the most is, Professor, your work in 2002, The New Middle Ages, the Word System in the 21st Century. I was wondering whether you are going to write a new one for the future of Indo-Pacific. Okay, and then we also have Professor Gordon Flake. Currently, Professor Gordon Flake is the founding chief executive officer of the Perth USAsia Center at the University of Western Australia. Reading from your website, Professor, Professor Flake is one of the world's leading authorities on strategic developments in the Indo-Pacific. So you have all the competencies and legitimacy to talk about this. So I'm glad to be at your service. And Professor Flake is also a sought-after media commentator. So we will be entertained by his statements today. Okay. And later on, we will be joined by Ambassador Bilahari Kausikan, former Permanent Secretary of Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Singapore, and he is currently chairman of the Middle East Institute, an autonomous institute of the National University of Singapore. Yes, those are the three speakers. Let's start. We will start with the very basic question. We are aware of the right perception towards this highly potential region. So as an opening, I would like to ask the two speakers, Professor Tanaka and Professor Flake, could you briefly elaborate what constitutes as a peaceful and stable Indo-Pacific? What do you think is the regional order that is ideal and desirable for this particular region? I would like to invite Professor Tanaka first.
Well, thank you very much. What constitutes the Indo-Pacific? I think before I define what constitutes the Indo-Pacific, I would like to point out the long-term economic and even civilizational change that has taken place over the last several decades. And that is the rise of the Indo-Pacific as a center of economic gravity in the world. this I said is long-term economic and even civilizational is because this Indo-Pacific used to be I would say the center of world economy before the Industrial Revolution. Professor Anthony Reid wrote the book called The Age of Commerce, and he focused on Southeast Asia. But I would argue that before the Industrial Revolution, particularly around the 15th, 16th century, East Asia from Japan towards Southeast Asia toward Indian Ocean were connected. And to that connected network of commerce, Europeans joined after the beginning of the 16th century. And so after the Industrial Revolution, the center of world economy shifted to the Atlantic. And 19th to 21st until the middle of the 20th century, the world was dominated by the Atlantic. But then that trend shifted in the latter part of the 20th century so that the center moved to the Pacific. And then as we enter the 21st century, the center again appears moving toward south so that two oceans are being connected. And so I think it is not an accident that in 2007 that former Prime Minister Abe made a speech in the Indian Parliament, the speech entitled "The Confluence of the Two Seas." And so I think the reason why we talk about this regional concept reflects this civilizational change. And this civilizational change creates opportunities and for mutual prosperity among the peoples in this region. But in order to solidify and enjoy mutual prosperity, we need to keep or preserve peace in this region. And so I think the adjectives that this webinar used is quite proper, peaceful. But I would add a few more words that could constitute the desirable international order. Well, Japanese government used free and open. And I think free and opens are quite appropriate terminology, because even if we can create a peaceful region, if it is oppressive and closed, that's not desirable. And so I think we need to create a free and open region so that we could mutually prosper among ourselves. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Tanaka. Professor Flake, or should I call you Gordon?
Whatever you will. Thank you. I'm greatly honored to be here. And first, let me congratulate both the Foreign Policy Community Indonesia and GRIPS for this event. In the last 3 or 4 years, the Perth USAsia Center has produced 6 different edited volumes on the Indo-Pacific, one focusing on India, one on Indonesia, one on Vietnam, Korea, Japan, and most recently Europe. And it's not a coincidence that we launched our Indonesia one together with FPCI and Ambassador Jalal, and that we launched our Japan one in GRIPS. And so thank you, President Tanaka, for your words and your support. Those of you who are sensitive to accents will note that I have kind of a funny accent for an Australian, a little bit more Arizona than Australia. I've lived in Perth now for the last 8 years. I'm an Australian citizen, but prior to that, I spent 25 years in Washington, D.C. And so in some respects, I'm the physical manifestation of the U.S. rebalance towards Asia. And I'm looking at these issues differently now from Perth on Australia's Indian Ocean capital than I did when I was living in Washington, D.C. My views are quite different. And I've spent a lot of time thinking about the Indo-Pacific. I very much appreciate President Tanaka's framing. This really is about broader economic trends. When I began my professional career 30 plus years ago, nobody used the term Asia-Pacific. You know, we talked about East Asia, Southeast Asia, South Asia, and Australia was floating around in some mystical land called Oceania by Atlantis, right? And it really was the desire for ASEAN to lead, Korea and Japan to integrate southward, and Australia and New Zealand and the Pacific to be part of a region that led to the notion of an Asia-Pacific. But even 30 years later, there is no firm definition for Asia-Pacific. There is no membership for Asia-Pacific. In a similar way, there is no firm definition for Indo-Pacific, nor should there be. There's no membership in the Indo-Pacific. Every country has a slightly different strategy for the region. But again, Professor Tanaka was accurate in focusing on the core. It really is, how do we incorporate India into the Asia-Pacific? That's the core. And then the broader question is, why do we want to incorporate India in the Indo-Pacific? One, because of the economic trends we've been talking about. But I would actually offer something more important. This goes to Professor Yazid, your question. You quoted Thucydides. These days, we're all talking about the Thucydides trap. But before he talked about that, he made this really interesting observation when he was talking about Athens' demand to the I think it was the Melians, where they said, surrender or die, right? And he said, is that just? And his response was, the strong do what they will, the weak suffer what they must. The interesting thing is, after the horrors of World War I and the horrors of World War II, the international community, led by Europe and the United States, but also countries like Australia, and as evidenced with ASEAN, came together to decide we do not want to live in a world where might makes right. We want to live in a rules-based order. And in my view, the Indo-Pacific is all about the rules-based order. The Indo-Pacific is a construct, is additive. It's about making sure that no one country has too much influence in a region, so might makes right. And one of the ways you do that is you make it more expansive. Free, open, inclusive, ASEAN centrality, however you want to include. It's an additive concept. By bringing India in, it becomes more about rules, shared rules, standards, norms, institutions. And so that's why I have a fundamentally, again, additive and positive view of the Indo-Pacific, precisely because it's not about the strong do what they will, the weak suffer what they must.
Okay, thank you for that. I would like to follow up on the rules-based order, but we have Ambassador Bilahari in the room already. Thank you for joining us, Ambassador. I have introduced you before. Yes, you are just in time to give your view on what do you think constitute a peaceful and stable Indo-Pacific. Professor Tanaka has done his, Professor Flake has done his too, and it's your turn now.
I like your batik, by the way, Bilas. Very nice batik.
Apa? What?
I like your batik.
Well, I bought it in Jakarta. You have to like it, you know. Anyway, look, okay, that's a very good question. And what I heard of Professor Gordon Flake's answer, I agree with. I don't know what Professor Tanaka said. But let me say
economic. It's economic. He said it's economic.
No, I think first of all, there cannot be peace without stability. So first of all, we need an Indo-Pacific that is in equilibrium. And I don't mean just a military equilibrium. I mean equilibrium conceived more broadly. When we talk about balance of power, we tend to think in binary terms, right? But this is an immensely complicated region. You have India, you have China, you have South Korea, you have North Korea, you have the ASEAN countries within ASEAN, you have Vietnam, Indonesia, Singapore. It's an incredibly, you have Australia, it's an incredibly diverse region. It is what I would call a naturally multipolar region. I don't see that this region can ever fall under the sway. You know, stability is necessary for peace, is necessary for prosperity, but you need a stability that is based on equilibrium, because a stability could be based on empire, right? And that's not good. Right? So what you need is an equilibrium, a multipolar, omnidirectional equilibrium, right? Not a balance that is directed against any particular person, but one that will preserve maximum autonomy for all. Because that's the other value I think is very important. It's connected to a rules-based order, because there are no rules. Some of us at least will have no autonomy, right? That often quoted saying that Professor Flake mentioned in his remarks, you know, what was it? The strong do what they want, and the weak suffer what they must, is to me a very deterministic and fatalistic kind of statement. But we all have autonomy, we all have agency. I call the kind of realism, there are some people who quote that statement as a statement of realism. I don't think it's a statement of realism. It's a statement of what I would call crude realism, mechanical realism, right? Whereas true realism recognizes your agency and recognizes also that there will always be limits to agency, and the purpose of your policy, the purpose of statecraft, is to maximize that space for all of us, big, small, medium-sized, to exercise agency. That is what I would like to see in our region, the broader region.
Okay, thank you, Ambassador. Yes, we already have some keywords already: peace, stability, equilibrium, and rules-based order. Like I said, I would like to address the rules-based order because it has been discussed for many years now, right, Gordon? I mean, like, I was in Singapore with Ambassador Dino Jalal, and it's already the topic of the conversations there. And the next question will be in line with what Haikal from Universitas Airlangga is asking in the chat box already. Let's talk about Quad. Let's talk about the new actor, AUKUS. How do you see them? Do you see them as a younger player coming into the region, or like Professor Tanaka said, that they have been there, the interactions are already there, or should we see them as the guests and the hosts? What will ASEAN do? What can be expected from ASEAN? Gordon.
Well, thank you. Those are really big, but really good questions. I was very fortunate, despite the fact that, like most of us, I've been stuck at home for the last 2 years. I was fortunate to be in Washington, D.C. During most of the month of September. And that meant it happened to overlap with the ASEAN ministerial meetings, the ASEAN 2+2 security and diplomatic ministerial meetings, with the AUKUS announcement, and then with the first ever in-person meeting of the Quad. And I, despite having been there that time, I would probably repeat what I've said over the last 4 or 5 years. The Quad is not the Indo-Pacific, right? The AUKUS is not the Indo-Pacific. And candidly, ASEAN itself is not the Indo-Pacific. And I'm less concerned about the relative age of organizations than I am their focus and functionality, right? And the truth, I think, in these cases is that they're fundamentally different strategies to respond to what Dr. Tanaka referred to in terms of the changing geopolitics and the geostrategic environment in the Indo-Pacific. They're countries that are working together. One of the things I think is really interesting about what Ambassador Kausikan said is that if you look at it on a very fundamental level, countries who are champions of the Indo-Pacific are also champions inherently of multipolarity, right? So if you note it in May of 2018, when the United States changed the name of the Pacific Command to the Indo-Pacific Command, And when they have, Kurt Campbell as the Indo-Pacific czar in terms of that process, that inherently recognizes that relative US power will be less, because that means it's a greater role for Japan, a greater role for Indonesia, a greater role for Australia, a greater role for India. And I think people view that as a fundamentally good thing, to have more polarity in terms of that process. And so one of the questions, and again, I'll be a little bit gentle in asking this, is opponents of the Indo-Pacific as a construct, the question is, do they oppose multipolarity? Do they propose growing strength and influence of India, Japan, Indonesia, or broader groupings into that process? Now, again, I'm going on too long here, but to be very specific about AUKUS and the Quad, both of these are inherently Indo-Pacific strategies. This is the shared strategy of Japan, Australia, India, and the United States to kind of work together on, in this case, the Quad thus far has had a pretty progressive and very forward-leaning agenda on vaccines, on technology, on climate change, on supply chains, which again is not what people expected 2 years ago or 3 years ago. The AUKUS, again, everybody's focused on the submarines, but as its core is strengthening technology sharing, but it also has a heavy security overlay in that, recognizing we need to get there. And both the Quad and the AUKUS actually say more about the United States than they might say about Australia or the region itself. It says that they're understanding these fundamental changes.
Thank you for that. I'll move to Professor Tanaka. You've been working on ASEAN, and you can add the element of Japan there. What do you think these two elements will react to Quad and AUKUS?
Well, in my view, I don't know, Bilahari may disagree, but in my view, Quad and AUKUS are parts of what Bilahari called equilibrium. In order to keep the equilibrium stable, we need lots of elements so that very few people may make misjudgment or miscalculation. And so the addition of Quad and AUKUS to the existing alliance system will enhance I would say the stability of the balance of power, or the stability of the equilibrium. And so I believe Quad and AUKUS are complementary to the existing alliance system. Then what does these have implication on ASEAN? When we talk about ASEAN's internal workings, I don't believe that they would have much impact. I think when ASEAN's are dealing with many of these internal issues, I think that's to the ASEAN to decide. But then when it comes to the issues that have implication toward larger Indo-Pacific regions, for example, the stability of South China Sea is not only to the issues of ASEAN. It is a very important issue for the stability of the entire Indo-Pacific region. And so in order to maintain peace in Southeast Asia, I think the multi-layered security-related frameworks would be positive. And then, for a country like Japan, which has security concerns in East China Sea, we need a system to deter China So far, the US-Japan alliance is still and continues to be the most critical pillar of such efforts of preservation of peace in East China Sea. I think Quad and AUKUS are both very, very important for Japan to preserve its security. And so the as when it comes to ASEAN issues, we all agree with the centrality of ASEAN. But there are quite a number of issues beyond ASEAN, which we have to do a lot. And I think the Quad and AUKUS are the mechanism for the members of such frameworks to deal with issues beyond ASEAN too.
Thank you, Professor. Ambassador Kausikan, will you disagree?
No, I don't disagree, actually. In fact, what I'm going to say the same thing in a different way, right? As I said in my earlier remarks, this is a very complicated, diverse, and therefore naturally multipolar region. I do not think it is possible or even desirable to think of the architecture of such a complex, diverse region in terms of a single structure. What you have and what we already have is multiple overlapping frameworks that complement each other if possible. I don't see any contradiction in, say, Japan and Australia are members of the Quad, but they're also two of the most important regional dialogue partners of ASEAN. Australia can be member of AUKUS, but it doesn't make it any less important a dialogue partner of ASEAN. And you can go on, right? We need to get away from thinking that ASEAN centrality means monopoly. In fact, that is, to my mind, a sign of insecurity in ASEAN. We didn't used to be like that. But over the last 5, 6, 7 years, I see a growing sense of loss of confidence in ASEAN in itself. Right? Every time a new framework arises, a new concept arises, whether it's the Indo-Pacific or Quad or AUKUS, you name it, immediately there's all kinds of wringing of hands and arms. Oh, what does it mean for ASEAN centrality? We should be a bit more self-confident, you know? And if we want to remain central, we are not going to remain central because we just repeat that we are central and other people say we are central. You know, other people say we are central for a variety of reasons, okay? And we shouldn't be too naive about that. If we want to be central, we will start to have to think in a more activist, in a more proactive way about how we relate ourselves to all these new frameworks that are developing in response to changes in the strategic environment. You know, it's not, I don't see this as, you know, they have to relate to ASEAN. Why should they relate to ASEAN? They serve different purposes. And the purposes they serve, are they contradictory with ASEAN? I don't see them. Insofar as, let us say, the Quad and AUKUS stabilize the region, another means of stabilizing the region, I think they support ASEAN, because a regional organization like ASEAN cannot exist or cannot survive or cannot prosper if the environment is unstable. Why was ASEAN? ASEAN exists to stabilize Southeast Asia, but ASEAN could not survive unless there was a broader stability that was created by a balance created by the presence of the United States and its allies. But having developed, ASEAN is now contributing in its own way to the overall stability in this complex system of multiple overlapping framework. Frankly, I think all the frameworks that have been mentioned so far are complementary, but one I think I am rather skeptical about. When China talks about community of common common destiny of mankind, I think we should be aware. I'm less polite than Professor Flake, as far as be more direct, right? I think you should be aware that in Chinese political culture, community is based on hierarchy, right? Community is not a horizontal concept. It is a vertical concept, and guess who is at the apex? I think that doesn't mean we should shun China. Of course we can't. It's stupid, right? But we should be aware that when we talk, when we use the same words, when ASEAN uses the word community, and China uses the word community, and the EU uses the word community, we don't really mean the same things, you know? We're just using the same words.
Okay, thank you, Ambassador. Yes, it seems that all these initiatives are making people cautious and nervous. Nervous might be too strong, but as we can see in the chat box now, there have been questions about Quad, AUKUS. What are the implications? But let's bring the big guns, US and China. Let's bring them in. I would like to be a little bit futuristic. So let's predict their course of actions. Where do you think they are heading? And what would be the impacts? I have to start with you, Gordon, because you start by saying that there's a change of view since you come to Perth.
Oh, look, I think it's really important to recognize that there's actually only one major power that wants to make this a G2. They wants to make this about the US and China, and that's China. They want this to be superpower to superpower, right? And which is why I went out of my way to say it's actually quite remarkable that the United States is so proactive in strengthening partners, right? In strengthening Japan and strengthening India and wanting India to have a vibrant role and wanting ASEAN to be more vibrant and wanting Indonesia to step up. I mean, just look at the US reaction to the ASEAN the ASEAN Indo-Pacific outlook, which was, again, largely rustled and run by Indonesia. That's a good thing. Those were all welcome developments because they want a more multipolar world. So I'm going to slip back into my Aussie vocabulary here, right? When we say rules-based order, some people think we're just talking, about some strange little concept that doesn't really apply in life. And yes, it's true. A rules-based order still has a foundation of security. It still has a foundation of power, right? But if that foundation of power is intentionally, networked, intentionally trying to strengthen organizations, institutions, and standards and norms, that's a fundamentally good thing, right? So I'm kind of viewing this era not so much as just US versus China, but is really, do we support the rules-based order? And there's been two primary threats to the rules-based order in the last 5 years. Number one has been a change in trajectory in China. China has benefited from that rules-based order and the international system more than any other single country, right? But they have changed direction for their own domestic political reasons. And the second area is the United States. The United States under Donald Trump was hostile to the rules-based order, which it was largely instrumental in constructing. And what that meant was that the world kind of woke up. You don't realize how valuable something is until you are faced with the risk of losing it. And so what I have seen from my Australian perch over the last 5 years is incredible leadership from Japan. If you would have told me 10 years ago, or no, 5 years ago, that Japan would be a leader on free trade, I wouldn't have believed you, right? But they heroically, together with Australia, resurrected the CPTPP, right? If you look at, how proactive Indonesia has been on these things, again, the standard, mentality we have is that you cannot trust India to not miss an opportunity, but that's not what they've done for the last 5 years. They're very proactive. The same goes for the region as a whole. And then it's also very interesting to me. The last thing I'll say here is there's a lot of people who will occasionally voice the concern that the Europeans should stay out. This is not their region, that Europe should take care of Europe, and that way the US can bring its forces out of Europe and focus on China. And I could not disagree with that more forcefully. My view is that having the British, the French Indo-Pacific strategy, having the Germans here, what that does is that strengthens the argument that this is not about the US versus China. This is about the rules-based order. And by making it more complicated, more, as Bilahari said, more multipolar, more about the institutions and standards and norms, the better we all are off in that process. And so that's why I welcome this conversation we're having, because these institutions are all different strategies, but they're all fundamentally about making it less reductive, less about two big dogs, and much more about the system, which I support.
Thank you, Gordon. Ambassador, would you agree with that? I assume you would agree to that.
Well, I'll not only agree with that, I'll add to it. Huh?
Okay.
I think there are two fundamental realities, the fundamental changes in the strategic environment that perhaps we in ASEAN haven't sufficiently internalized. We have probably internalized one, but not the other, right? One is, of course, we are facing, for a whole variety of reasons, a more assertive China, right? And that's a fact, right? Whether it's in the South China Sea, the East China Sea, whether it is in the Himalayas, there is a different mood in China and a different approach. I think China made a mistake, actually, by abandoning prematurely the Deng Xiaoping's approach of, you know, hiding your strength and biding your time. Right? You look around the world now, not just in Indo-Pacific, right? Everybody acknowledges China's importance. You have to, right? But if you look at multiple types of surveys, is China trusted? No, right? Right? And it's because of Chinese behavior. You'll be very hard pressed to find any country in any region, even some that are very dependent on China, that do not have some concerns about some Chinese behaviors at least. And some of the things we have been talking about are responses to that, right? But it also responses to another change in the strategic environment. And that's changes in the US. Now, Mr. Donald Trump did not invent transactionalism, you know. Okay. He may have accentuated it, he may have exaggerated it, but it's always been there. After the Cold War, there is no particular reason, and ordinary Americans are no longer prepared to, clearly, for America to bear any burden and pay any price to uphold order, whether it's in the Indo-Pacific or more broadly. It doesn't mean they are retreating from the world. But it means that they are demanding more from their friends, allies, and partners to share the burdens of upholding order. And in again, Quad, AUKUS, and many other things is a response to that. In fact, I think the first Asian leader, in fact, the first world leader to recognize that was Mr. Abe in his second term. Right? And he did a whole host of things that allowed Japan to play a bigger role as a partner of the US. And that's a good thing. Now, Mr. Biden is in that same framework. His priorities are domestic. Mr. Obama's priorities was domestic. Mr. Trump's priorities were domestic, and Mr. Biden's priorities are domestic. You have to build back better in order to play the role that he thinks America should play. When Obama was elected on the slogan of change, the people who voted him did not understand change as change abroad, but change at home. In other words, after all the sacrifices of the Cold War, the so-called war against terror, it was time to put America first, in Trump's rather crude way of putting it. Now, ASEAN has not yet sufficiently realized this. The Europeans have not sufficiently realized this. I remember laughing to myself when Angela Merkel first met Trump and came back and told European leaders, we have to rely more on ourselves now because we can't rely so much on the US. And she said it with a great air of surprise. But actually, every post-Cold War president has been telling the Europeans this. It was only Trump that caught their attention because maybe he was crude and forceful in how he told them that. Now, Mr. Biden has said, and he has taken a much more consultative approach towards friends, partners, and allies, particularly in the Indo-Pacific, right? But ASEAN does not realize sufficiently this. Consultation is not an art form practiced for its own sake. He is consulting you to see what you are prepared to do with him, how far you are prepared to cooperate with him on things that are important to the US. Now, you don't have to do everything that the US asks you to do, but you have to define, at least for yourself, in your own mind, nationally and collectively as ASEAN, the parameters of what we are prepared to do and not prepared to do. And if you don't, well, the Americans will be very polite. He will turn up on Zoom to attend your East Asia Summit as they've just done and so on. But will your centrality be taken seriously? I don't think so. We haven't sufficiently internalized it. And there are warning signs. Look, some Thai friends grumbled to me because they were bypassed twice by Secretary of Defense Austin and Vice President Kamala Harris. Indonesia was also bypassed, but I think that was a slightly different reason. Thailand is a treaty ally of the US. But both these people came to Singapore and Vietnam twice. And we're not treaty allies, and we don't want to be treaty allies. Right? Why? Because we have had a discussion with the United States about what we are prepared to do and what we are not prepared to do. And in Singapore's case, it's even formalized in the 2005 Strategic Framework Agreement we have in the US, and in the 1990 MOU allowing them to use facilities, right? Now, if ASEAN wants to be taken seriously, it has to respond to this new mood in America as well as the new mood in China. Have we done so? Not enough.
Thank you, Ambassador. Professor Tanaka, how about Japan? Have you, your country anticipated this?
Well, I agree with both Gordon and Bilahari with respect to what they said. Rules-based order, multilateral participation, and then the seeing reality in the US and China. But I think having said this, again, we have to assume that the competition between the United States and China continues, and continues, I think, in the long run. That's because the reason behind the necessity of competition from both Washington, D.C. and from Beijing are quite structural. The U.S. I think believe under Mr. Biden and probably under the even during the Trump administration, particularly amongst the establishment of the U.S., that allowing China to have the technological dominance in the world is a really dangerous threat to freedom of all democracies. And so US is determined not to allow China to dominate technologically. And then on the Chinese side, China is determined not to allow the US to change the Communist Party rule. And these two are really strong determination on both sides and would not be reduced very much in the coming years. And so we need to assume that they will be competing each other. But then, of course, as President Biden says, he doesn't want military conflict. And I believe Xi Jinping does not want military conflict either. well, some argue that you know, that China might attack Taiwan after the Beijing Olympics. I don't believe that's you know, plausible, because for Mr. Xi Jinping, bigger dream is a dream of you know, resurgence of a great Chinese nation. And for that, China still needs a peaceful environment. And so we will face the period of, you know, very severe competition in a various ways. But not direct military confrontation. Of course, having said this, we need to urge Americans and Chinese to avoid miscalculations, avoid accidents to getting out of control. But I think we have to create a rules-based order, free and open Indo-Pacific, inclusive Indo-Pacific, keeping the competition underlying is very, very structural.
Thank you, Professor Tanaka. I sense this call for participation, inclusiveness, and so on. But then comes the question, what about the current condition with the pandemic, where everyone resorts to an easier way of arrangement, like bilateral or even unilateral measures because of the condition. Do you see this as a weakening of multilateralism? Can we make that brief, because we have a lot of questions waiting in the chat. Ambassador, what do you think? Is
I'll be very brief, all right? Multilateralism is not a magic wand. It is an instrument of policy. The instrument has to be fit for purpose. It may be the appropriate instrument in certain cases. It may not be the appropriate instrument in certain cases. In the case of the pandemic, it was an emergency, right? If we wait to get a multilateral consensus, we will all be dead by now, you know? Right? But it doesn't mean now that the immediate emergency has abated a bit. We should not go back to see what we can do multilaterally to prepare for the next pandemic. But it's not a magic wand, you know, it's an instrument of policy, which sometimes will be appropriate, sometimes not appropriate. And that's true of all countries, you know.
Okay, thank you, Ambassador. Professor Tanaka, what do you think?
Well, I think during this period of COVID-19 pandemic and the process of getting out of that, unfortunately, we need to count on bilateral arrangements because situation in every country is different. And so we may rely on bilateral arrangements of opening up the borders and allowing travels and business transactions. But I don't believe that's going to be the death of the multilateralism. As we somehow open up the borders and somehow, you know, continues to work together, then I think the time of multilateralism can come. And then particularly, you know, given our amazing ability to use this ICT technology now, you know, we closed up all the borders, but still we are conducting this, you know, very lively webinar. And the ASEAN leaders meetings conducted in online, and then many transactions conducted multilaterally. And so I think there is a great opportunity for multilateralism once we get over the physical isolation caused by the pandemic.
Thank you, Professor. Gordon.
I'll also try to be very brief here. in broad-based market economics, one of the most widely exceptions to kind of laissez-faire, invisible hand notions is monopoly behavior. People pretty much accept that when you have monopoly behavior, there needs to be a government intervention to correct what we call market failures. And one of the things the pandemic made quite clear is that in our increasingly global market, there have been some market failures, and that's primarily in the concentration of risk. And so I think countries are legitimate to be concerned about supply chain risk, about concentrations in supply chains of things like critical materials, future technologies, et cetera, particularly given the geostrategic overlay we've been talking about, right? So I think what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to continue to build on the advantages of multilateralism. And again, ASEAN forms a very important base for those efforts. But at the same time, we're going to have to recognize the risks of concentration of all of our battery industry, all of our critical materials, all in a single country, in this case, where that really essentially has been market failures in that process. So we're going to have to live with what people have recognized, because the current situation has a clear risk in a failure to diversify.
Yeah, on that note, let's move to the questions from the participants. We haven't really touched the economic, well, we have, but not that much yet. But we have a question here from Walter Sim from the Straits Times of Singapore. Could the panelists discuss China and Taiwan's bids to join the CPTPP, a pact that goes beyond trade and has economic security implications, and the impact on the Indo-Pacific? How should pact members navigate the geopolitical implications? I'm giving the floor to any of you.
I'll start on that real quickly, just because we work on this a lot. Number one, and this is something we haven't said enough, while there has been a tremendous rebound in Washington, D.C. under the Biden administration in terms of diplomacy, security, alliance relationships, the one area where the Biden administration is still almost completely silent is on economics and trade and investment. And that's a really important thing. So candidly, we wouldn't even be having this conversation if the United States had taken advantage of the door held open by Japan and Australia and others. And so this is the problem. I mean, the truth is, everybody knows that on the merits, Taiwan is fully prepared and qualified to the TPP. And on the merits, China gets further and further away every day. They are moving away from the core principles and requirements under the chapters of the TPP. They're attacking their private sector. They're reconstituting the situation the TPP is designed to move away from, that Vietnam and Malaysia and others have decided to move from. But at this point, because of the absence of U.S. leadership, this is just pure geopolitical play. This is China trying to block a Taiwanese move, and it's Taiwan trying to, as they do in so many others, get some more things. The real important question is, why isn't Korea in the TPP, right? Why aren't we moving forward in Malaysia to get it ratified? And most importantly, why in the world is the United States failing to lead in this most important sector to this region?
Thank you for that. Professor Tanaka and Ambassador Bilahari, would you like to add to that?
Well, I think the bid from China and Taiwan complicates things, but I do not worry very much. Or in a way, I agree with Gordon in the sense that the Biden administration is quite silent about the possibility of coming back to TPP. Maybe we should wait for a few years for the United States to come back. But I think, China's bid is I think can be a stimulus to the U.S. Or American debate about the merit of U.S. Trying to explore the way to rejoin TPP. Well, in any case, in order for China to join the TPP, all countries agree for that. And well, in my understanding, Japan wouldn't agree with that. So I think it takes, years before China has any chance of joining TPP. And by that time, I think the UK would have joined the TPP. And then we don't know what would happen in the US if Mr. Trump and others, the Biden administration will be ousted. Then maybe it may be hard. But I think the current joint efforts by Beijing and Taipei to join TPP, well, don't change things much.
Okay. Ambassador.
Well, look, in an ideal world, we should look at every applicant on the basis of whether it can meet the criteria in full and within a reasonable transition period. But of course, this is not ideal world, right? And the politics surely comes into it. But like Professor Tanaka, I don't see that this is something that we are going to be able to decide on anytime soon. So it's right. So, let's look at all applications with great deliberation and meticulously.
Yeah. Okay. Let me take the opportunity to ask about Indonesia. Philip cannot be here, but there are some questions about Indonesia in the box. Let me find it. How can key players like Indonesia can go beyond expressing concerns regarding power projection proliferation in IP, Indo-Pacific? And there is another question, I think, about our president. What do you think should he do? Do you think President Jokowi is doing enough, or does he need to take more assertive roles in addressing the Indo-Pacific security challenges? How so? And that's from Erwida, from Nikkei Asia. Anybody?
Sounds like a question for Bilahari.
Look,
he has the Vatican, so he's ready.
No, look, Indonesia is obviously a big country that is a key player, all right? But I think, for you to fulfill the potential, the key is to get your economy going. You're underperforming economically for all the reasons I think every Indonesian knows.
Yeah.
President Jokowi has made a big start because of the omnibus bill and the implementing things, and that's a very good thing, right? That's a very good thing. I think, you don't have to worry about playing this role, playing that role. First, you have to concentrate. You have a role because of your size, because of your location. It's automatic almost. But to achieve the potential, you have to get the economy right. You are not performing as well as you ought to be. That is, to me, the key.
Yeah, I can sense that from your statements from the beginning. We have to claim the role, right? Yeah. Okay.
So
Gordon,
let me go back to the first question there about how Indonesia should respond to power projection in the region. And I just want to reemphasize something I said earlier. Power projection into the Indo-Pacific is not inherently bad thing. The question is, what is that power doing? So again, having a German frigate, the Bayern, is that a bad thing? Having the UK aircraft carrier battle group, is that a bad thing? If the power projection serves to strengthen the rules-based order and to multilateralize or pluralize or multipolarize things, then power projection is probably a good thing. If it is might makes right, and it fundamentally undermines institutions and takes away choice, that's probably a bad thing. So power projection which provides choice is good.
Okay. Professor Tanaka, would you like to add to that?
Well, I think I agree with Gordon about this power projection, but as a country of this huge size as well as quite big potential, and also a country that has overcome some of the extremely difficult issues of reducing poverty, I'm personally hopeful of a Indonesian more active role in development cooperation with other developing countries. There are, many countries that are in need of achieving many of the difficult targets of sustainable development goals. And I think, Indonesia still has some miles to go to eradicate extreme poverty, but the past record of Indonesia was quite impressive. And so I think if Indonesia is to become more active in increasing what used to be called the South-South cooperation, I think that would be a very important areas of collaboration in the Indo-Pacific.
Okay, hopefully the G20 will be connected to that too. Since we are taking the leading role there. Yeah, so the last part that I would like to address to you, our speakers, our experts, is that what do you think is the capacity of these regional arrangements or initiatives to penetrate to the national or domestic level? Because there are questions here, for example, from Catherine Logan about how will it affect knowledge exchange across primary produce industries, tertiary studies, and such. And also there's a question about how will it affect, let me see, I think it has something to do with the Philippines. Yes. Satrio Santoso asked about will it add oil to the burning fire in the West Philippine Sea? So yeah, would you like to address that? And Pak Dino, would you like to add, because we are closer to the end?
Yeah, I mean, the question on what Indonesia should do, especially by President Jokowi, we had a response, potential response in the concept of the Global Maritime Fulcrum, which was, I think, the most important foreign policy doctrine enunciated by President Jokowi in the first term. But somehow that concept became only a infrastructure concept rather than a geopolitical concept, right? And every time I asked what is the geopolitical implication of the Global Maritime Fulcrum, nobody gave me a clear,
straight answer,
right? And then in the second term, the Global Maritime Fulcrum was no longer mentioned, for some reason, right? And the second concept of importance was the ASEAN outlook on Indo-Pacific. In fact, every time I ask the foreign minister, what would be the most important achievement that you made as foreign minister, she would list that among the top three, right? But again, there's a big question of what next for the ASEAN outlook on the Indo-Pacific, right? For some reason, there's just not so much content to that concept as yet. And lastly, in terms of Indonesia's response to power projection, I think the approach has changed from one of equidistance to one of becoming even closer to both Beijing and Washington, D.C. So when people ask, which one you choose, the answer is both. And rather than keeping a distance from both Washington and Beijing, Jakarta now is trying to get as close as possible to both Beijing and as close as possible to Washington. The problem is in the last 4 or 5 years under President Trump, it has not been easy for Indonesia to get closer to the United States, right? So that's the problem.
Okay, thank you for that insight, Pak. Back to the last one. to the panelists. What do you think? How can the regional arrangement penetrate the more local or domestic issues?
So I'm the least qualified in this, so I will go first and be very brief. But in the end, this is where I think you see the wisdom of the decision of the Quad leaders not to focus on big picture geostrategic, defense kind of issues, but because candidly, we're still in the midst of the COVID era, and if we can't get vaccines in a serious way, we're there. If we can't deal seriously with supply chains and climate change issues, those are the issues that people are going to care most about. The others are really important, and they will continue. They're just not going to penetrate to the broader public. And so I think, and again, this is why I'll go back to what I said before. It really is that economic infrastructure that's going to have the most immediate impact on people's lives. And that's where we've got to do a lot better.
Yeah. Professor Tanaka.
Well, I agree. Well, at the outset, I characterized the rise of Indo-Pacific as a reflecting the long-term shifting of global center of economic power. And the Indo-Pacific has a potential to be very dynamic and prosperous. But for that purpose, we need to develop lot of areas from bottom up. And then there are necessities of building sufficient infrastructure, both physical and soft one. That is human resources development. And I think the Indo-Pacific is not simply a matter of geopolitics. It is the matter for the opportunities of mutual development. And for that purpose, if our Chinese friends agree, we could cooperate. And then regional countries, well, can somehow, if it's possible, the play China off against Japan to make offer that is useful for the development of the different countries. But I think there are many, necessary infrastructure we need to construct, although I'm very, very unhappy about what's happening in Myanmar. If a coup d'etat didn't happen, we could anticipate that Myanmar could become a really important country to connect Southeast Asia to South Asia. But now it's, temporarily, I hope, that's out of the question. But then still Southeast Asia can increase its efforts to connect yourself to South Asia. I think, well, JICA is now continuing a big project to build a deep sea port in the place called Matabari in Bangladesh. And so with the completion of deep sea, the traffic congestion in Chittagong will be reduced, and then you will have a port that connects Southeast Asia and the rest of the world to the inland Northeast India, Nepal, and Bhutan. And also, I think Southeast Asia can connect with India to explore your future with sub-Saharan African countries. I think the vision of the Indo-Pacific will be, I think, felt this way in locally and in a semi-national level too.
Thank you, Professor. Ambassador, yes or no?
I will just reply by reminding you of an old ASEAN slogan. Actually, it was an Indonesian slogan about ASEAN, but I think it has a wider applicability. National resilience enhances regional resilience, and regional resilience enhances national resilience. I don't think it is a choice. It is a synergy.
Okay. Thank you very much, Ambassador. I have to conclude. I mean, like, I would like this to go on. I mean, but Dino, I don't think 90 minutes is enough. I really hope that we can convene again and continue the discussion. However, I'll just quickly take out the keywords. Indo-Pacific can be defined in many ways, but economic prosperity should be the last aim, the final aim. We need to figure out how do we achieve the equilibrium. Should we crowd the region by doing that, so we can prevent the concentration of power in some actors? And then we have to make strategic decision. Like Ambassador said, multilateralism is not a magic wand. All the decisions must be made strategically. It has to be made based on the needs and the interests. And then I think the one thing that really struck me is the confidence of the inhabitants of the regions, to be able to create this equilibrium, this peaceful and stable region. We need the confidence of the countries within the region. With that note, I would like to end this discussion. It has been a pleasure, Professor Tanaka, Professor Flake, and Ambassador Kausikan. I hope that our discussion today will shed more lights towards the region. Thank you very much, and I'll give it back to the Master of Ceremony.
Thank you very much, Dr. Yazid. Please give a round of applause or virtual reaction for our moderator and speakers for the fruitful panel discussion today.